So much. Recording our session today. Just wanted to start by introducing myself today. Thank you for joining us all. My name is Itzel Torres from 3C Ren, working out of Ventura County. Before diving into all electric building stories from the field, I'd just like to give you a little bit on who 3C Ren is. And yeah, just super brief. So 3C Ren, we are the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, which is a collaborative partnership between San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. We work to improve energy efficiency in our region by offering free programs and services for all building professionals and households. 3C Ren is funded by ratepayer dollars that we all pay into our utility bills through the public's good charge. We currently have 3 programs at Energy Code Connect, Building Performance Training, Home Energy Savings. The first one, Energy Code Connect, serves all building professionals, offering service for everyone from plan examiners and inspectors to architects and contractors. We offer 3 distinctive services: the Energy Code Coach, which is an over-the-phone, online, over-the-counter, and in the field Title 24 consultation service. Trainings much like this, but more energy code focused, and regional forums. And for our building performance training program, we serve current and prospect building professionals, and we offer instruction and technical skills related to building science principles and systems for high performance buildings, as well as soft skills such as sales and marketing and communication techniques in order to grow your business. And for our last program, which is a home energy savings program, we recently launched our multifamily program, which is at no cost technical assistance with rebates offered. Our single family program is soon to be launched, but in the meantime, you could check out our DUI energy home savings toolkits at any county library in the region for more information on how to do basic little upgrades in your own home. So it's a really fun way to interact with your family, or if you're just trying to learn a little more of things you could do in your home, that's a good way to do that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our instructors for today, Jennifer and Andy, to lead the way on this training today. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. So Jennifer and I are both architects with Imbalance Green Consulting, and Jennifer is a certified energy analyst, and I'm a lead accredited professional. And I apparently did not change today's date. I apologize for that. We also have Mike Horgan here with us. He's a contractor and certified in Passive House. And so he'll be able to chime in with more stories from the field, because it's a fun topic for us to be talking about. So our learning objectives are set up here so you can get your AIA or ICC learning units. Hopefully you registered with those numbers, but if you didn't at the end, feel free to reach out to Itzel at 3C Ren and she'll get you taken care of. So here's what we're talking about today is basically all electric buildings, because we have a bunch of them under our belt now as a community, as a building community. Here's 860 on the Y. It's an all electric affordable housing that's been running for quite a while. But what we're seeing here is that we need to keep updating and learning as we go. So we'll have an overview of why all electric in the first place. We'll talk about appliances, kind of knock that out right out, because that's one of the early concerns. Heat pumps, of course, the kind of that core of successful all electric. The electricity itself, because of the impacts to electrical panels and renewable energy. And then we'll have some resources that could help with that. Questions and discussions, we'll have time at the end, but if you have something pressing, jump in, put it in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat. And or you could even unmute. We're not that big of a group that you could be able to chime in with your own question or story, and we'll have some time at the end. All right, so going in with the overview. So we have had a series of higher performance buildings that we're looking at. And overall, we're talking about buildings that have lower energy bills. They're built in such a way to manage moisture so that we don't have those kinds of problems and indoor health problems. They're comfortable, they're using current technology, they're healthy and resilient, and increasingly they are all electric. So when we look at these higher performance buildings and the systems approach that builds on a lot of passive house principles in terms of not having thermal bridging, of having great insulation, of minimizing air leakage, thoughtful window selection, balanced ventilation. And when you layer on top of that the all electric, you end up with a system that's renewable, right? So you can generate the electricity over the course of the year that you're using in the home, and cost effective. Studies have shown that, really rigorous studies, that it's either cost neutral or increasingly a cost savings to go all electric. It's safe because you don't have combustion gases and we get that healthier interior. And of course, it's either low carbon or zero carbon because our grid is so much cleaner now than it used to be as well. So it meets many goals at once. But implementation can be another story. So the general concerns that issues that we've encountered so far, first is just a lot of outdated information. So we really are trying to get in and have more current information. We find builders are often or sometimes reluctant. So we might have an owner or an architect on board for all electric, and the builders have concerns. There's a big cost variability. We might talk about, oh, this and such should cost this, but then it might cost that, or it might cost twice that because contractors and suppliers are trying to figure out appropriate pricing. And there are technical nuances in the actual implementation, so because it's different. And so as we think about our responses to that we need to acknowledge that these challenges are real, and that there's options, there's fixes, we can take care of some of that, and address those gaps in education, training, supply, keep evolving and responding. All right, so let's talk about some specifics. We're going to start with the appliances and the cooktop, because one of that last holdout is often the gas cooktop in terms of going all electric. So we're still seeing consumer reluctance. Do they kind of totally understand their options in terms of induction? It's not totally clear, but when we think about electric cooking, a lot of times people are still remembering those kind of old coil electric resistance kind. Even if it's a glass top, it's still electric resistance unless you really know that you're getting induction cooktop. And they're also looking for maybe a specific look of a gas top, of an appliance, and the industry just hasn't caught up necessarily. So one of our colleagues in the office here, his mom was doing a big kitchen remodel, and then although she was supportive of the concept, it didn't really have the look. So our responses as we assess that is really that there's the market is responding. There's a range of options. And so here's a really pretty impressive one from Range Masters. They're all still pretty modern looking, but I think the market will respond to that. This is actually a photo from one that's at San Luis Ranch here in San Luis Obispo. We have 1,300 all electric homes coming online, and they're putting in the induction cooktops. So we're just seeing more people using them, loving them, and so we feel like it's going to resolve itself with some more experience. And our main thing is keep talking about induction. With that in mind, we're seeing also professional chefs who are giving demonstrations. So we'll just take a couple minutes to watch this particular video. I think it's kind of helpful.
Another thing that induction cooking is not, it is not a barrier for cooking certain foods. You can easily char a pepper really beautifully. Look at that. You can
get
tortillas just crisp and beautiful. Oh my goodness, look at this. Tortillas just come alive. You get a beautiful, beautiful crispy char in that if you'd like. Over here, wok cooking, you definitely need a big flat bottom wok. This one works amazing, and this thing gets smoking hot. So my wok sizzles away,
A lot of
stronger than
Asian
most
cooking
gas
using
that you
induction.
have at home, right? It's a lot of fun to cook on. It is also not a reason to throw out your cookware. All of the cookware that we're going to show you right now, that all works on induction and many more. As long as a magnet sticks to it, it's going to work.
Yeah.
That's your test. So I can tell you what induction is. It is significantly more powerful. So I'll put this on. You can see this is room temperature water. And yes, I have $20 bill here. I can boil this water incredibly safely, incredibly quickly, and be safe enough to keep the money right
It's
there.
like, it's the gimmick they all do. They put a piece of some money there because there's
When
no
I
flame
am talking
or
about
heat at the
control, it's
burner.
much more controllable. Instead of having to, with pancakes, throwing.
So that's the general concept there. But it's, yeah, it's a really good system. So, and then an interesting thing that we're seeing is the transition for induction cooktop is that these little electric units, you can actually check one out from the library to try it out, but you can see they're super affordable. So we're seeing some folks use just kind of in small cooking spaces, going to this type of induction system. They're going to like expo, cooking expo kinds of things. So we're seeing induction cooktop in a whole variety of settings. So we're going to transition here to dryers, because when we talk about electric dryers, we they're all getting lumped together. So Jennifer can bring us going on this one.
Yeah. Okay. And really, oh, okay, great. I was, someone in the chat had asked for a link to the video, and I think someone else answered it. Okay, wonderful. The other thing, Mike and I both know engineers who, I'm going to mention something about the cooktops again, because these are real stories. Mike and I both have a story involving an engineer who, in both cases, different people, different clients, both cases were not convinced about the induction until they either watched the videos or they got the small ones and tried them out themselves. And my particular clients, they did try the inductions, the surface top, plug it in, and it works, but they do notice that their particular cookware makes a hum. And so we're trying to track that down. So I just want you all to know that if you do purchase the ones that sit on the countertop type, not all of them are created equal. So I would, if that's your first introduction to it, I would look at the reviews and maybe use a slightly heavier weight pan on those just because they vibrate. But once he resolved that and chose a different element to be on the top of his counter, it works fine. And now his whole kitchen's going to go all electric. So I just wanted to share that with you, that some of those plug-in ones on the top are not all created equal. Okay, now on the dryers, sometimes the electric dryers can become somewhat of a hurdle for going all electric, but not so much, because we're all familiar with like a standard electric dryer that vents to the outdoors. And basically those work a lot like the gas ones do, which is they make a lot of hot air, and they run that super hot air through your clothes to dry your clothes out that way, and then they send all that moisture and all the extra heat outdoors, and they have to be vented. But what we're talking about here is ventless ventless electric dryers. And the ventless, both what's called a condensing dryer and also a heat pump dryer. You'll see that in the literature when you look up your ventless dryers. They both have a condensing coil in the unit that runs very, very cold fluid through that condensing coil, and it pulls moisture out of the air before they send it into the dryer. So that way they can use lower heat and use dry air to dry your clothes instead of high heat to dry your clothes. So they're both better for your clothes. The main difference between these two types is the one that's marketed as a heat pump has some refrigerant in it, some refrigerant cycle in that condenser, and sometimes a secondary heat exchanger to make it more efficient. And that sometimes will come with more bells and whistles, and they try and price it out properly. So the way it works is whether it's got refrigerant or it just does it with really the cold water non-refrigerant type, is the air enters in through the dryer like at the number 1 slot, and it loops back around and goes through that condenser coil where it becomes dry. And then once the air is dry, it is gently heated and run through the dryer, and then that air is rerun back through, which is what number 5 is trying to say, is they take that air and they run it through the condensing coil again to dry it out further. And these dryers don't require a vent to the outdoors. So like Mike likes to talk about, and Mike, you could chime in, is you don't have to have a big hole that goes through the envelope into the outside. What you do need to know when you look at these, and I think it's worth knowing when you're talking to your clients, is if they are going to go with the ventless dryer, which I recommend, is to have them look a little bit deeper into this to figure out if they're going to get a self-cleaning cooling coil or one where you actually have to pull it out manually and clean it off. If I were consulting to my clients, I would really look to the self-cleaning unit, just because I think a lot of folks get busy and they'll forget to pull it out and clean it. And then up at the top, some units, I've seen some styles where you actually have to take that condensed water and manually empty it, but most all of them now come with the hose drain option, so you don't have to manually empty it. And a lot of them that are stackable units, that drain hose pairs with the washing machine, and then all the water goes out together. I have a story here, and actually any questions, feel free to chime in, or Mike, you want to add anything, but I do have a story on the difference between the quote unquote condensing dryer and the heat pump dryer. Now, the Bosch unit is what my sister and she was helping her son get his new apartment set up. And they were super excited to tell me that they got the Bosch heat pump dryer. And when I helped them investigate what was going on with their dryer, we realized that they actually got sold the Bosch condensing dryer. So the only difference on these things, it's about $300 cost difference, but one difference is that the condensing dryer requires more ventilation, intake, and airspace because it doesn't have the secondary heat exchanger. So you can see the doors are solid on this closet, and they thought they were getting the heat pump, and they closed it and their clothes weren't drying. So I want you all, when you work with your clients, to realize there's some small differences like that. So folks aren't disappointed with the product, but they realize that there's just a slight difference between these things. And there is a little bit of difference in the need to have air circulating around the dryer. So in this case, they could have replaced the doors with ones that have louvers in it, or they could replace the units, but they decided not to. And instead, they decide to just keep the doors open when they do laundry, so it gets plenty of air circulation. But otherwise, they work great. When it comes to new appliances in general, all electric appliances, they are much more energy efficient than the old electric appliances that some of us who are older, we kind of think of our refrigerator, dishwashers, and dryers needing a lot of energy. But the new refrigerant technology or compressor cycles have made all of these appliances more energy efficient. And this is going to help reduce some of the load in your building, even though you're switching off of gas to electric, you're increasing your need for electricity, but at the same time, the appliances are getting a lot more energy efficient. So the overall impact isn't quite as severe as what a lot of people think when they think of going for an all electric house. Now, when it comes to remodels, there's sometimes a little bit of advantage now in getting these newer appliances because they also have what's called less demand. And so that potentially could ease some of your electric panel woes, which I'm going to talk about later on my own house. And you'll see how beautiful that electric panel looks. And that's a joke, by the way. I'm being very facetious. Place to find these products is to go to marketplacepg&e.com or the energystar.gov products and the products list, and you will have the most energy efficient appliances listed there. Okay, any questions in the chat or comments,
Yeah.
Mike? You want to
Anything else?
jump in?
I do have a couple things I could chime in on. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, Andy mute. Okay. This is awesome. I like the humor factor, the subtle jokes that only people that are in this workshop will understand. When we've done all this in workshops before, so some of the notes I'm just writing down are things we've said before that just haven't been said yet here. But when well, I almost just said when we're cooking with gas, when we're drying our clothes with gas, we're effectively cooking our clothes. You're essentially putting in your clothes in an oven and destroying them while you dry them. I mean, you're cooking your shirts in order to dry them. So with the condensing or the heat pump dryers, you're not cooking. You're actually drying by removing the moisture. So it might not be that important to everyone, but clothes last a lot longer. Every little bit helps. Jennifer, you were talking about remodels, and such a huge portion of this work that we're trying to do pertains to existing housing stock, and it's pretty easy to do a lot of this stuff in new homes. You got a blank slate, you can start from scratch, but with remodels, it's a bit more difficult. So we're finding that using these dryers and remodels makes some of the work a lot easier. The venting situation of a gas dryer, from a builder perspective, it's one of those things we all just try to not think about. And I've said it before, but it always ends up with like the youngest kid being hung by his ankles over the back of the dryer and trying to zip tie this vent to the back of the dryer that's then got a 90-degree angle on it. And it can get really messy, and everyone's kind of like, well, I hope that's working the way it's supposed to. And it's supposed to, but sometimes it doesn't. So you basically eliminate that factor, and we're able to locate these in different places in the house as well. So we can put them in places that are really tight, like the closet that you had shown in that other picture. And we're putting some in a tiny cottage remodel out in Cayucas, and we're putting them way down in the basement, but we're putting them in the middle of the basement, not near an exterior wall, because we don't have to vent to an exterior space with this. So we're just putting it inside our bedroom closet. We do have to drain them, so we're going to tie it to the bathroom drain, which is sharing the wall with the closet space. The time factor for drying clothes, again, something we've talked about before. People will say, well, it takes longer to dry clothes with these condensing or heat pump dryers. And yeah, it probably does. It takes what it should take to dry clothes when you're not frying them in an oven. So it does take 45 minutes to do a load of laundry, whereas we've become accustomed to now doing an entire load and putting it in the dryer and having to dry in 20 minutes. So you have to wait another 20 minutes. A major convenience in the big scheme of things, I know. And I think you guys are going to get to talking about costs a little bit, but you know, we're talking about things that are tiny percentages when you look at overall projects. If people are spending, you know, not every one of our clients spends $7,000 on their refrigerators, but some of them do. You know, you can offset the cost of these things very, very easily by switching something else in the house, like a front doorknob. Don't spend $600 on that, spend $100 or whatever. But the cost difference is actually pretty small. So that's my 2 cents for right now. Thanks.
Awesome, thank
Thanks
you.
for reminding me about the the benefits of, especially in remodels, not having to find a place to vent. I mean, that was the cool thing too with my sister and her son with that apartment, is they could easily put those units there and just, you know, take that condensate water and send it out in a small drain that they connected to where the shower was already draining. So it was really simple solution in that sense. Okay,
Great.
Andy, you're going to go into
All
heat
right,
pumps.
yeah, let's carry on to heat pumps. So heat pumps, one of the main issues that we're seeing here is that people have had past experience with heat pumps in some kind of a format or another. And so we're having to not just teach, but we're having to unlearn old information and bring it to another. So this is a real conversation that I had with my neighbor, a retired contractor. And he talks about heat pumps. They're expensive. They don't work in cold weather. They break down, and that you still need a furnace. So he was just thinking for air conditioning. This is me. Hold on. Since this is me, let me get this down. For those of you who know me, this is a more appropriate scale. So I talked to him like, that's old heat pumps. Today's are affordable. They're effective. They work in all weather, and they're used for cooling and heating. And so heat pump talking points. Heat pumps don't generate heat, they transfer existing heat, so they're much more efficient. You can see that in this chart to the right. They work like your refrigerator, so we know that technology really well. They provide heating and cooling because they run in both directions, as it were, in terms of moving that. So it's cost effective. You don't need a furnace and air conditioning. And they're quiet, they're compact, they work in all weather. Mike has pictures of them in the snow, and they do just fine. So we have a whole session about heat pumps, so we won't go over the specifics of the installation, and 3C Ren has those on demand, and we'll be offering them again, I think, in the spring. And so this is more like a quick walkthrough just to kind of demystify. This was a retrofit at Jennifer's house, so you can see kind of comes in boxes and hoses, and you bundle all of the lines together, electrical communication, wire, line set, and you install this condensing unit, kind of a big suitcase type of unit, and it sits on a fiberglass pad. It's got its dedicated electrical, so you do need to make sure it's coordinated with electrical. And then you have the line pop into your house. And then there's one of these boxes, and you see these boxes all over the place, and you mount it to the wall, and you hook up the hoses, and here's what they look like. So pretty straightforward installation. And it was done like at Jennifer's house in like, I think 3 hours, and they were finished. Yeah, about 3 hours. So and Mike too, I mean, that's his experience. It's like you think it's going to be complicated, and you just kind of get out of it and go, God, is that it? So heat pumps, I think we're in commercial construction, it's really the default. In residential, it's becoming the default. So thankfully that one's just kind of working itself out. When you go to the multifamily, it's a little tricky because, like, where are you going to put all these units? We were working with Deborah Woodle, who had attended some of our webinars, so she knew about the heat pumps and that you had to have an access panel to the equipment. And so being thoughtful in the design of that up front in a multifamily unit. So the solution they were doing is when you first walk in, you can have a little bit of a drop ceiling. And then she found this nifty little access panel that's a drywall inset, and it just folds right up into the ceiling. So pretty nice solution to be able to be really efficient with the space. On the commercial scale, these are for the People's Self-Help Housing Office, their own office, all electric. And so they put their larger equipment on the ground in a little walled-in area right next to the building. And so that left their roof free to be able to put all their solar panels on. And then heat pump water heaters is having a little bit more of, it's a little bit more on the uphill side of that learning, the steeper side of the learning curve, because it hasn't been quite as common, but it's really the best solution when you are thinking about any kind of volume of water that you should do. A heat pump water heater has that same efficiency. But Michelle in our office, when she went to get a heat pump water heater to replace hers, she had to go through like 6 different contractors because they tried to talk her out of it. They didn't know what it was. They, you know, the prices varied wildly. People were charging a ton of money just to try to put their own learning curve on it. And so for her to be able to have, you know, a Jennifer and a Mike in her back pocket to be able to say like, no, you need to ask for this. This is how it should be, et cetera. I mean, not everybody has that. So being clear about what that scope of work is, and then making sure that the owner of the company or whoever gave you the quote is translating that then to make sure that the people who are doing the installation also know what they're doing and have the electrical coordinated as well. In this particular case, there were questions about the recirculation, and Jennifer, maybe you could chime in on some of the other things to be looking out for heat pump water heaters.
Yeah, I'm also was looking and noticing the chat. And so some of the chat, the questions are having to do with, okay, hey, do you need now an electrician for some of these appliances? And if you don't already have a dedicated circuit or an appropriate outlet and at that place where you're going to locate the appliance, then yes, you are going to have to also have a licensed electrician come out there and bring power to where you want to locate that appliance. But just FYI, new construction under our current code requires you to have the appropriate electrical for your heat pump water heaters like this. The newest code that's going to be that they've finalized the language on, but will be coming into effect in January of 2023. The new construction's actually going to require you already have the appropriate electrical setup for your dryer area, your cooktop area, your water heater area, and your furnace area. If you're choosing not to use these appliances off the get-go, you will be required to at least already install the electrical necessary so that a plumber could come in and just put your water heater in and set it up and not need the electrician. So you can get a heat pump heater in there and not need to bring out the electrician. You can just order the induction range and slide it into place and already have the electrical there. So with this issue, with Michelle's particular project, she had this one fixture that was far, far away from everything else. And so she wanted just that one fixture to have a recirculation pump. And this comes up a lot in discussions with heat pump water heaters. Some brands do not work well with recirculation pumps because the appliance wants very cold water. Because of the way the refrigerant cycle works, they want very, very cold water because they can dump a lot of heat into the cold water to cool off the refrigerant. If the water's already warm, it can't get rid of the heat in the refrigerant, and then the compressor and the condenser, that whole refrigerant cycle doesn't work properly. So that was one issue. Other brands are a little more forgiving, but they have a particular way they want the recirculation pump plumbed, which is that recirc pump has to be combined with the cold water supply going back into the tank so that the water is still relatively cold. So the refrigerant cycle works. And in Michelle's case, they kind of did an old school maneuver where they just said, we want to just pull this this line and let's just plumb it into the drain port. It's a tank. And a lot of plumbers do that, and I don't recommend it. And actually for multifamily projects under the new code, it is not allowed to use the drain port as a way to plumb any kind of water heater, especially a heat pump water heater. You don't want to do it. So our recommendation is, even as a homeowner, follow the manufacturer's diagrams. And if the plumber is not following that diagram, you make them do it. Make sure it in your contract, even small, simple contracts, that it is part of the contract that you're going to follow the manufacturer's recommended installation diagrams and instructions.
Great, thank you. And kind of to that point in terms of the having to pre-wire anyway. In this case, it was an ADU on a rural lot, and they have a tankless gas water heater was the initial design. And so then they wanted to change to a heat pump water heater, but those heat pump water heaters need a fair amount of air changes to be efficient. So you can't just stick it in an interior closet and call it good. You can put it in a garage, is a great place to put it. You can put it in an outdoor closet, which is what they ended up doing in this situation. So they built a little outdoor closet with a louver door. You can also put it in an indoor closet and actually have it vented to the outside, or you can do a split system. So you have the tank inside and that same little condensing unit that we were showing you before, that can be outside. So in this case, they put it in this little closet exterior, and they were able to save 150 feet of gas line for this rural lot. So quite an energy savings and all those other benefits of going all electric. I know we've seen a lot of other cases where gas lines are just crazy expensive potentially. A little harder to justify in a retrofit when you have a situation where gas is right there. You don't get that savings right up front with the investment of new gas lines. But if you don't have gas, or you're having to extend gas line or run gas line through to new places, that's definitely on the credit side of the financial equation.
Yeah,
Jennifer, were you?
Yeah, can I jump in here?
Sure.
ADUs are kind of are an interesting little subset now for trying to fit like a heat pump water heater for some of these reasons we're talking about. Like the outdoor closet one works good for our mild climates, like on the coast and climate zone 5. I don't recommend it for like climate zone 4 or like 9 or 16, which are also in our areas. Because it's a bit cold for that type of appliance. The split system, Sandon, works great for those cold climates. The other thing is, if your ADU is really small, like under 500 square feet, again, the new code coming up 2023, that takes place January 2023, they recognize that as kind of a problematic area. So for those really small additions or ADUs, you can use the electric on-demand water heater as long as it's right up next to the shower and has the super compact plumbing very small distance between the on-demand hot water heater and your biggest appliance, like your shower. That kind of segues into a question I saw in the chat where someone wondered what was the difference between like on-demand and recirc. So in this case, when I'm referring to on-demand and the appliance itself, we're thinking of like a wall mount gas unit that doesn't have a tank. We're calling that on demand. And same with the electric for the small ADU under 500 square feet for the new code. It wall mounts, it's directly behind your shower, and you doesn't require any venting, and it's on demand in the sense that there's no tank for it. And then with the heat pump water heater that had a tank, that yes, the recirc pump was a on-demand type to follow code. In other words, Michelle, they would push a button and it would tell the unit that yes, to run that little pump to come around, so it does move that cold water out of the pipe. But again, it's connected into the cold intake, and so it just works seamlessly in that system for that one appliance. So I hope that answers that question. In no way do you want like continuous recirculation of hot water. And in fact, it's not allowed under current code or the new code at all. So if you do have a continuous pump running, you're doing your clients a huge disservice, and it's completely in violation of the building code. Okay.
All right. And then,
yeah.
yeah, so this is just a kind of a model installation, again, with a side, just because people haven't always had a chance to see these things. Here's kind of a fun installation, again, at that People Self-Help office for scale. This is Grant, who's over 6 feet tall, so you can see it's a pretty big unit. And it's got a separate little power supply, electrical circuit right there. It's got the a floor drain that has the condensate drain and a relief valve into that. There's an expansion tank up here, this blue thing, and then there's a mixing valve. And you can see that all the pipes are insulated too, which is great. So nice installation for I guess it's maybe a 30,000 square foot office building. Anything else, Mike or Jennifer, on heat pumps before we go to talk about electrical panels? All right, here we go. Jennifer.
Okay, so one of the things I've learned on my own conversion, stepwising to an all-electric house, taking existing home, everything in it was gas, and I'm moving my way towards all electric. So I'm going to hit a little bit on each of these topics, and Andy will hit on kind of those the last few. The part of the current code, 2019, is if you're going to install a gas water heater, you have to pre-wire for the future use of a heat pump water heater. And this part of the code now has been applied for coming up to the other appliances. And this just gives you an idea of what that might look like. And you would have your dedicated electrical circuit, and in the electric box, you would put that, you'd put that circuit connected into, in this example, a 20 amp breaker with a blank that says the future 240 volt, and that way you could easily convert that over. So that same kind of thing would be happening on the inside, and on the outside, you'd have the electrician install the 15 or 30 amp 240 volt breaker box, that dedicated circuit, depending on which appliance you're using. So that little diagram at the bottom, that actually is a diagram of what those split system heat pump water heater would look like. So the outdoor unit's there and it only requires a 15 amp circuit and sends the hot water into your indoor tank. Okay, so that's something to consider when you're remodeling your house is go ahead and pre-wire it for everything. Now, what happens with a lot of the houses these days is if you have a panel that's only say 100 amps, a 100 amp electrical panel, that's eventually going to be too small if you're converting your house to all electric. So part of the response is if you're going to do substantial electric work, get the panel upgraded sooner than later. The new code is current code is you have to have a 200 amp panel. Anyway, current what will be the code for 2023 is a 225 amp panel. So they really are anticipating that more of us are going to be moving the projects all electric. That
but
is a picture of my
That's so
electric.
beautiful. Your panel. Aw.
This is the beautiful electric panel that I inherited when I bought my house. And so when I look at that, I had to start to look at some rules of thumb of whether or not I was going to need to upgrade my panel. And I wanted to put this there. You guys are going to get a copy of the slides in case you haven't seen this. You can go through some of these basic steps yourself to get an idea if your house or your client's house needs a bigger panel. A lot of times the simple answer is just yes, go with the 200 panel amp anyway, if you're gonna, especially if you're gonna get solar. But you could do it by following this kind of a formula, by looking at the floor area and doing an assessment of your whole house. And I could stepwise you through the formula if you want, or you guys can call me through Code Coach and I can go through it with you more in detail. But what I basically did was took my project, my house, and I looked at my existing situation. And I do use a car trickle charger already for my electric vehicle. And which is there. And I already had installed those mini splits. And so luckily, I actually saved a little bit of demand on those mini splits from having like a traditional air conditioner. So I gained something. And then I assessed the rest of the house. And so when I do that formula, I come out to 79 amperage needed, and the panel size is 100 amps. So okay, that would work. Now, when I said, okay, I got to do the same exercise, but I really, really want to get this induction range unit installed sooner than later, and that's the one I purchased for my house. So I do the same formula, and that takes me up to like 92 amps. My panel size is only 100 amps. That's cutting it really close. I can already tell you with how my house is wired that when I trickle charge my car, and incidentally, a bunch of these things were all strung together with the way my house is set up. So I've got this outdoor outlet that trickle charges my car. It happens to be the same one that my microwave is plugged into. And it happens to be the same one my toaster oven is plugged into. And when all three are going together, it almost always blows the breaker. And I have to go, oh, you can't do the microwave and the toaster oven, kids. Oh, I'm charging the car, and I go outside and flip the circuit. And so I'm just giving you a heads up that this is like real life stuff that could happen to you and your clients as you move towards all electric. So my solution actually is I'm going to be getting solar, and they're going to put in that 200 amp panel with that, and then I'll finish out the rest of my my electrical upgrade. Okay, anything, Mike? I know you deal with this stuff a lot of times.
I do, and I'm busy in the chat too, chatting away with everybody in there. So I'm catching your conversation in my left ear and watching the chat and having a conversation there. So
cool, very cool. Okay.
I did say that almost the first thing we talk to a client about right now. And I kind of made a joke, apart from telling them it could take a year to get their permit for an interior alteration right now, is upgrading the panel for the existing house. If it's a remodel, if it's in a new home, we're talking a 400 amp, 320, 400 amp right off the bat. And it's just part of the package. But if it's an existing home, the first thing we do is we get them on PG&E's list for an upgrade and set them up with our electrician. So that's pretty much the very first thing we do.
Yeah, yeah. And so, the next step is I want my nice, faster charger set up, and I want to switch out my uh, dryer because I've already got the good washer. And so once I add just a couple more things, my house will be a disaster. So in terms of not having a big enough panel size. So yeah, just heads
Right.
up.
Yeah, and good point about the coordination with the utility. That's huge.
Yeah.
Busy times. All right, so as Jennifer mentioned, the next piece, once you've got it, everything all electric, is of course to take advantage of renewable energy. The main issues that we're seeing on that one is that folks are finding that they don't have enough space for solar panels, and the upfront cost can be daunting depending on the size. So in terms of the not enough space, it's right sizing the system is of course important. If you figure out your baseline that in new construction is required by code, need a little bit more to go all electric, a little bit more if you, or a lot more potentially to charge your cars. But you can start smaller and have room to add. So if you're doing a lot of conversion, or you're not sure how much electric use you're going to really have in the long run, you can start a little smaller and then just have space to expand depending on what your actual use is. Sometimes hard to predict. In terms of location, trying to simplify your roof forms and be careful about the varied heights. So a lot of times, parapets, giving kind of visual interest on your different roof lines. It makes it really hard to cluster solar panels. So just be thoughtful about simpler roof forms. And if you are doing kind of the parapets and chimneys and architecturally interesting that way, try to put them on the north side so that they don't end up throwing shadows and limiting your roof space. And you can take advantage of the dual purpose of shade structures over parking, over walkways, those types of options. And then in terms of orientation, if you lay it flat or close to flat, it doesn't matter, of course, what direction is orientation. And most orientations will work even on a sloped roof. So this diagram shows that if your roof is sloped 2 and 12 or more, the green zone is kind of what meets the letter of the code in terms of, yes, that is appropriate orientation. But even if it has it on the like a more of an east or north facing, you can still often get some. You just have to discount the percentage of efficiency. And just remember that peak cost for energy right now is 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. So we're seeing kind of in the cost effectiveness world, thinking more towards southwest or a mixed use in terms of the solar panels. And so here's the kind of that flip side of when we showed people self-help and their electric devices and their equipment on the ground, is that here we have the solar panels, their entire roof is covered with them. They've got kind of this bank of inverters. They don't have a parapet. All they require is that little bit of walkway in terms of fire clearances. And it's a really terrific system. They're offsetting. We don't have the numbers yet, but at least 70% of their energy is going to be offset with these solar panels. If they need more, then they have an option for their parking, covering parking structures. And then the other barrier that we're finding is that upfront cost. And so as we think about that, is keep saying solar panels are not a construction cost. It's a power purchase decision. And you need to help your clients reframe that as it's a utility bill. You get an electric bill that you're paying to PG&E, 3CE, through PG&E or Edison or whoever your provider is. But that's what you're doing is your solar panels are your electric bill. It's just you're having to pay it up front. So that kind of lends itself nicely to thinking more about financing options, an energy efficient mortgage. They have some that are really targeted, that it's based on the savings you'll find, or even just a traditional bank loan. Still, they're cost effective. Most people we talk to are have cost savings on day one, depending on what your electric use is. Mike?
I'll just repeat, stories from the field. The cost to run gas from the sidewalk to a new house we built last year was $11,000. And the cost to install the entire PV system to power the entire house, 100% of the home, was $9,400. So
that's crazy to me. So not installing gas, and you still came out ahead by having and doing all of the solar panels up front. So these folks, they saved in construction costs and had like basically, other than the monthly charge to attach to the grid, they're basically zero energy. Thanks. And then just the other option there is just the leasing or rent to own kinds of options where folks will, company will come in. There's no upfront cost and it's convenient. So it might not be quite as cost effective, but there's definitely something, some situations that really warrant more of the, the leasing consideration where you don't have to deal with it at all, basically, their panels. And there's some pretty neat approaches that are coming online. We've had some struggles in the non-residential world in terms of if you have a commercial shell, so the owner has the shell, but then there's a tenant. Neither party wants to invest in solar panels. So there's a new company that's based here in San Luis, but working all over the place, where it's a multi-tenant commercial space, and they're basically doing a lease and a payback on the electricity. There's ways to folks who are serving nonprofits, et cetera. So some neat things happening in that world as well. And then just to put the icing on the cake of renewable energy is the battery backup. And so we're seeing this in terms of interest in resiliency, being smarter about being able to have basically your urgent load. So your refrigerator, a little bit of lighting, some outlets for recharging your devices. Those can manage to keep you going in terms of for quite a while, because you have your solar panels recharging the batteries. So you just need to plan ahead, enough space, about 10 feet wide by 8 feet high, group your equipment together. It's okay to wrap an inside corner, but try not to have it like be sprawled out around multiple sides of the building, because you need to know where all those switches are. And, it doesn't pay for itself right now, even though you can shed kind of some peak load types of expenses. Batteries are still just more expensive than that. So that's not what we're seeing. Looking ahead to the 2022 energy code, which takes place in 23, there's going to be more incentive in the code to do battery or be set up for a battery. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yes, Andy. Yes, for the residential code for the 2022, you have to set up your panels so that it's battery ready. And there's going to be a couple different options for the way you could do it. But one option is you would go ahead and set up a sub panel, a small one that has those dedicated circuits that address the resiliency that Andy was talking about. So you would choose your refrigerator and at least one light and one outlet in the bedroom, and something the light for egress, and you would at least designate those and have them pre-wired and have the conduit between the main panel and the sub panel, and then have that also pre-wired for space, and then it could be a blank that would be used for where that controller for the future battery would be positioned. So the state's definitely trying to stepwise everyone to a more resilient kind of grid, a more resilient self-reliance in new construction, and all electric, all as ways of reducing the overall carbon footprint and overall greenhouse gas emissions from how our energy is generated in the first place, and then how and when we use it. Because there's a big offset, like Andy pointed out, like people need the energy later in the day when the sun isn't out. So as more folks get batteries, instead of using the grid as a giant battery, they actually can use their own battery and take advantage of their own electric generation as well.
Great. All right, and then just to wrap up, and I know we're coming up on it's 1 o'clock, so folks need to, if they only have the lunch hour, we won't be offended if you have to drop off. So just some quick resources here, and then we'll go into Q&A as well. There's through the switches on, there's this Tech Clean California program. Again, you'll have the slides, but we're trying to get contractors to sign up to be a resource, and you end up being able to have the contractors get this incentive to do the electrification for heat pump and heat pump water heaters. So definitely check that out. Interestingly, Central Coast Community Energy also has some incentives right now. They're really focused on electrification of transportation. And so they've got incentives for electric vehicles and chargers and e-bikes, but they also have this EV readiness. And so if you are, and that's basically like the electrical work in order to be able to accommodate a charger. And so if you are needing to do, if you're doing that upgrade, or I think it's even new construction. So if you're doing the charger and then you need to do some electrical work in order to accommodate that charger for a retrofit, you can get some money back on that. There is one for new construction electrification. It's currently for new affordable housing, but they have additional programs in the works. So keep an eye on that one. So 3CE, and I think most of the folks on this call are in our Tri-County area, unless you're in the county, unincorporated county of San Luis Obispo. They're not enrolled as members, but otherwise most everybody else is. And so a case study, a friend of mine was able to buy a new electric car. He got a $2,000 rebate on that, got a $400 rebate, and then a $2,000 rebate for the electrical work. And so for him, with an EV tax credit, the federal tax credit, he probably got a $30,000 setup for about $12,000. So great timing to do that. And if you're income qualified, you can get even more. That's what those tiers are about. So definitely check those out. And that's the content here. We'll go into discussion and questions, but I want to make sure that we hit on the 3C REN. Again, here's Itzel's email if you have questions or need to get learning units or a certificate for something else. We've got some great classes coming up. Jennifer is taking the lead on 2 more energy code previews, one for multifamily, one for non-res. Res was last week and probably on demand. BPI certificate and HVAC design for code officials. And there's a forum coming up about what's the big deal about all electric. And it's in the evening. It's really for homeowners and the general public. So a terrific program. Please do keep going to 3cren.org to check those out. I'm going to stop share and open it up for whatever discussion. Feel free to raise your virtual hand, and we can call on you if you want to speak up. Or Mike and Jennifer, if you want to start with any of seeing, haven't been checking chat as I go, but it looks like there are 47 comments. So it's been very lively. And so let us know if you have anything else you want to add.
The chat's been pretty active. It's been really good. Paul just asked about experience with ground source heat pumps. I do have some experience with the ground source heat pumps. I don't know if this question will, I don't know if it's relevant to everybody, but my experience has been that I looked into it heavily about 12 years ago, and I dove in head first, and that was going to be the path we were going to go. And then we kind of accidentally put in our first mini split, and I said, okay, don't ever have to do a ground source heat pump again. And that's kind of where I stopped diving down the road of ground source heat pump, often called geothermal, but not exactly interchangeable. So that's my experience with that. I've found heat pumps to just be far more cost effective, but it depends on the situation. If you're in a real rural environment, you've got tons of land and you can dig up the land and put a coil in the ground that doesn't need to be too deep. And if you've got the equipment to do it yourself, you're a farmer, something like that, it might be more efficient to use a ground source heat pump. It depends on the situation, but for 90% of what I've found, the air source is more effective now.
Your experiences parallel mine. I had a client about 10 years ago decided ground source was going to be the ticket. Ground source heat pump. They're up in Paso, and there's natural hot springs and all that, and they're able to drill like almost like a horizontal type of hole to put the long tubes into. And that was before we had really good air source small mini splits available, or even air source that aren't mini splits but just have that are really large capacity. Some of them they make now that are very efficient are as tall as I am and wider. So I mean, if you have a very large house, like this house was 10,000 square feet, so now if I had that same client, it most definitely would be looking at those larger type of air source heat pumps, because the cost of drilling those horizontal wells to do the ground source was more expensive than most folks are going to want to pay but for their system. But at the time, for these clients, it seemed great. They also had a pond, so they used a coil in the pond for the cooling, and they used the other one for the heating, the hot spring. I don't know, it was about 30,000 10 years ago to drill each of the horizontal wells. But I can tell you now, that's probably what, they would spend a fraction of that on the air source. So my experience parallels Mike's a bit too.
Yeah, same thing with the water. If we had a client, it's kind of how we dove into it, is we had a client with a pond, and we were seeing if maybe that was going to be an option. And by the time we got done exploring the option, we'd installed our first mini split, and that was the end of the conversation. I went and got licensed and everything in Massachusetts to do ground source, and never did it because we found air source heat pumps. Paul's asking again about noise with air source heat pumps. I think it's noise is relevant to whoever the observer is. We still have a gas heater in our house. We haven't converted that yet. Just it's an old house. It's got a typical centrally located wall heater in the downstairs at least, and it drives me crazy when I hear that thing fire up. No one else in the house hears it, but I hear it. Whereas conversely, someone else might hear, the fan running on an air source heat pump and say that drives them crazy, but the sound of, gas burning from the stove doesn't bother them. So it's a different noise. So we might recognize it at first, and then it just becomes, a refrigerator. No one complains about the noise a refrigerator makes, because that's the sound a refrigerator makes, and we're all used to it and have been our entire lives. So we're just getting used to a different noise. It's not very loud. I mean, I wouldn't even call it loud. I would call them almost quiet, but I know some people have different sensitivities to that.
Right, and there's a comment too about
So,
some brands are
and
quieter
sorry.
than others.
I'm
Yeah,
going to jump in real quick because I forgot that we also usually launch a quick poll. So we can keep the
Oh,
Q&A
right.
going, but go ahead, Itzel, if you wouldn't mind just clicking on this, you'll also get a link at the end for a poll, but it really helps us out a lot. So if you wouldn't mind jumping in and helping us with our reporting, because we're using this public utilities money. All right, Jennifer, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was also thinking it depends on if you're talking about the outside or the inside noise level. So my outside condensing unit is really quite quiet. And the only time I hear it is when my neighbors are not running their air conditioner. Okay, it's so quiet, but their air conditioner, the standard air conditioners on either side of my house are so noisy that in my own backyard, I don't hear mine at all. When theirs finally kick off, I hear mine as a little hum. And I'm like, oh, I wish they would switch out to heat pumps. And then inside this little unit, I don't know if you can see above my shoulder, this is the indoor unit. And it's so much quieter than my gas heater used to be, and the fan that was on the gas heater that we don't notice it at all. So to me, I think they're quiet, but I agree. It's kind of relative, to everybody. It's a little bit different.
And some of the Todd and Javier are having a little chat about the brands. I almost forgot. I installed one on our garage for the COVID classroom that we had all through the last year and a half or so. We turned the garage into a classroom for 8 kids in the neighborhood. And so I bought just an off the shelf. I couldn't even tell you what the name of the brand was, but it was $600. We were kind of thinking it might be disposable. No one knew what the hell was happening in the world, so we just installed it. And I will say it is louder than the Mitsubishis and Samsungs and Fujitsus that I've installed over the last 10 years. But even still, it's kind of just like, oh, it sounds like there's a fan running. If you try to hear the fan, it's not a deterrent.
Yeah, I have the
I
Fujitsu.
see.
It's really quiet.
I see Javier, one of our wise advisors as well. Go ahead, Javier.
Yeah, one of the issues that I run into when I do the testing, the Hertz rating for some of these systems, is that a lot of the times the contractor will install a return that is too small for the unit, and it makes it a lot noisier. You could tell that the noise is the engine's trying to push through there. So I always advise them to make sure they size the system properly and get the biggest area that you can get for the return, because there's going to be a lot of noise on the inside of that home. When they try to do the smaller returns, and you could hear it, the air just pushing through there.
Oh, you bring up such a good point. And that feedback from our HERS raters and the case study people that are doing this for the CEC, for our Energy Commission, that feedback got back to everybody. So now, again, 2022 code, they've spelled out what the minimum size return can be now. And then your HERS rater would go make sure that you've at least met that minimum. But that's to help alleviate some of those issues. Yeah. And then if it's designed properly and installed properly, then these things are quiet. But that's a really good point. Yeah.
All right, so I think we're wrapping it up here. Thank you everyone for staying on the call. Jennifer or Mike, any last thoughts? Or Itzel, if there's anything that you need to chime in that I've missed already.
You covered it all. Thank you.
All right, Jennifer, Mike, we good?
Yeah, okay, I'm going to make one last plug for the Code Coach service because a lot of times they're finding after we do these, we get a lot of great questions. And through the Code Coach service, you can, which you could get to it through the 3C Ren website under the Energy Code Connect. You could go there and use either the texting or email, or if you call one of us directly, we could pull you through that portal, and then we can also address your questions through that service. So I just want to remind everyone it exists.
My one last thing, it was in the chat earlier. I can't find the person who wrote it, or I would mention, oh, here it is, Dave Intner. 90% of people preferred induction cooking once they tried it. So that seems to be the huge obstacle. It's a mindset thing. My parents are in their mid 70s and they moved to Florida. They are gas cooking people, you know, steak and potatoes every night. And they retired, moved to Florida. They have a home with an induction cooktop, and my stepdad cried and moaned. And now they can't imagine using anything else. You know, now they love it. They don't even think about it. They talk about it to everybody. So it's just a matter of trying it.
Those are great words to close with. Kind of the hallelujah of all electric. We'll get there. So thanks everyone for being here, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.